Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I hope you had a fantastic lunch, and don't fall asleep. We're talking about quite an exciting area this afternoon. So hopefully it should keep you awake. I think in terms of the session itself, we're going to focus primarily on renewables and looking at renewable energy, and it also focused on mobility, which are, as you know, hot topics in the industry at the moment. I'm joined by some very exciting, experienced individuals with focuses across ASEAN. So we're very fortunate to have Abdul Rauf Latif. He's the Group Head of Digital Ecosystems and Partnerships and CEO of DBS Malaysia. He also champions DBS digital strategies and leads Malaysia's offshore business and operations, which is quite exciting. We have Ralph Dixon, who's Executive Director of Sustainability at YTL Corporation and CEO of its carbon consultancy. He's overseen the YTL environmental and sustainability initiatives for over 15 years. We have Ali Izad Najafabadi, who is the head of APAC Bloomberg NEF, with laser focus on transition of regions' economies to a cleaner, more competitive future, and helps his clients identify transition opportunities and risks. And last but not least, Amanda Un from Volvo Trucks Malaysia, a practicing lawyer before moving to business development roles, and over 15 years experience with a strong understanding of the trucking industry and developing innovative sales and marketing initiatives. I'm Michael Heaney. I'm a partner within Ernst & Young, focused across ASEAN in terms of innovative and disruptive strategies and transformation initiatives, which is extremely passionate area for me in terms of the emerging innovative solutions which are entering businesses globally. If we take a step back and we look at renewable energy, more than a third of renewable energy globally is from renewable energy and is expected to grow by 4x by 2040, with solar PV dominating, but also other areas including concentrating on solar power, onshore wind, onshore and offshore wind, and also biomass, geothermal, and hydro we see globally emerging as key areas. The global renewables industry is growing fast, no doubt, with a huge potential for those who aim high, commit first, and move fast. I think we live in an incredible era over the last 2 years where we've seen solutions coming to market at an accelerated speed. And these are supported by new technology, business models, and various ecosystems become more critical to the success of these initiatives. In ASEAN, we have observed high economic and demographic growth with rapid innovation, disruption, everywhere we look, urbanization, industrialization, and an emerging energy demand from all parts of the sector. However, regulatory complexity, limited access to capital, incumbent interests, and rigid commercial agreements have enabled the continuing prioritization of fossil generation over renewables. And lastly, despite falling costs of renewable technologies, solar and wind project costs remain elevated in ASEAN due to a lack of the ability to scale and underdeveloped supply chains. Financing also plays a critical role in driving these sectors forward, mainly to support project development, fund essential infrastructure, tech adoption, and most importantly, mitigate many of the risks. So we'll kick off with some very interesting, I guess, topics which have come through various channels. We'll start with Ralph. Access to finance has been a reoccurring challenge for renewables and mobility. What specific financial barriers have been encountered, and how have you looked at addressing them, Ralph?
Thanks, Michael. First, I have to level set with DBS Bank being mentioned. Obviously, we are an offshore banking license unit here. So normally, when a bank sits in a panel, they're very happy to introduce themselves and see how they can help them with all the clients in Malaysia and all the banking requirements. Unfortunately, that's not the full space that we do, but we're obviously quite happy to see how we can normally help with the corporations with their requirements offshore. That's mainly our target in Malaysia. But having said that, to your response, I think I will give it a view around how DBS, we're seen as the Asian bank with a lot of strong ASEAN focus. So I'll give it from that perspective on the question. In terms of challenges, we keep saying the challenges around the financing element and all that. I think yes, it's been something that the market generally talks about in the last few years, that it's been hard to get into this and trying to get financing around this space. I think the fact is it's getting a little easier because there's a lot more communication around it and how banks operate and what we expect out of the corporates to be able to enjoy the opportunities that the banks can provide from a financing standpoint. Now, having said that, I think we also want to make sure the climate is very clear. So a few things. In terms of renewable energy and the mobility, let me put a little bit more focus on the mobility. It's easier to speak to that, at least in the context with some of the experience we have achieved. It's very clear Asia being an epicenter in this space. We know around a good part of the battery requirements and everything that goes into the car, a good 43% of the car build-out is actually the battery requirements. And those things something we know is a great opportunity to be able to work on. We also know the fact that the batteries being produced out of Korea and China being the top 5 players in the region, that's another view of opportunities that we look at. And of course, the charge stations and all that other players that are coming into the system. These are all various different kind of areas that we know there are opportunities we want to go look at. Having said that, we also want to be very clear that how we go about these opportunities. I think one thing that we work on quite well with is creating a framework. So there's a lot of the taxonomies that have come out, right? So there's an ASEAN taxonomy, which feeds into the GFANZ, and then it feeds into the Singapore taxonomy, and there's a lot of different pieces that come together. Now, we as banks, I think as we get ourselves more organized, the framework helps. So the framework around having the taxonomies actually helps understand how we're going to go about these opportunities and tackling these challenges. We came up with the first framework. I think we proudly say that we were the first Asian bank to produce something March last year, 2022, coming up with a framework around sustainability and sustainability financing. And there are 3 Ds that we look at. In fact, one is what you call divest, which is where we look at people who are actually exiting or decommissioning certain type of high energy assets as a measure. Because one thing we see across all the taxonomies that is very common is transition, right? So divest is one. The other one is diversify. So we look at names which are actually diversifying from revenues from different type of streams of energy producing applications to different type of energy producing applications, and how they're reducing the revenues in the high energy ones. So that's a different level of measure. And the third one is on the decarbonization side. The decarbonization side is more demonstrating the actual KPIs. They're more specific around how they've actually reduced these things. We want to avoid all the greenwashing and all these elements. So the 3 Ds that we look at, that's something that we take very strongly in our framework in terms of how we look at opportunities across all these names that we work with. So that has been, I would say, a main driver in assessing some of these things. With the larger names, the larger corporations, I think setting up the net zero targets and putting all the roadmaps in place and driving that has been a lot more easier in that front. But I think one of the biggest tackle that we look at in ASEAN is actually getting into the SMEs. And that's a space, I think it's a struggle to get everyone to be a lot more transparent around how they operate and how they're managing their carbon emissions. And that, for that to come out, is still some piece of work that we work with a lot of collaborative companies in Singapore and other parts of the world to help our SMEs and to deliver the right type of output, so which we can eventually consume and see how we can support them from a financing element. Right, so that's some of the angles that we take from an energy perspective to answer your question on the challenges.
No, thanks, Rav. I guess one thing that would be really beneficial would be understanding from the SMEs angle and what you're seeing in the market in terms of the adoption. The framework sounds incredibly exciting in terms of providing guidance. But if I'm a SME sitting in ASEAN, what would you say would be the critical success factors in terms of adoption?
First, they got to understand what it all means. And I think we are far away. If I look at the portfolio of what we look at, this is a realistic portfolio of what we look at now, what we see in our top-tier corporates. Our mid-caps and the lower part of mid-caps is the SMEs. We have a long way to go with the SMEs. I mean, the food and beverage businesses have got some initiatives. Everybody's got little light initiatives, but in terms of really getting into the agenda and having a plan and having a goal towards how they want to move this, I think it's still far away. So one of the initiatives that we've actually worked on, we've actually appointed a company in Singapore that it's going to work with us where we will provide a list of companies in specific industries where we have identified 9 industries. The industries where we want to work with these consulting companies, with the SMEs, to actually educate and train some of their staff. And I think we've identified right now, if I'm not mistaken, something like 900 people from X amount of SMEs in Singapore that we're going to train. And we're going to train them in Singapore. We're going to guide them how it's done, how some of the best practices, what they should be looking at by industry. And that will eventually help us. So this is kind of work that we are putting into the society to be able to drive the SME work. Very few, I would say, unless they are very directly related to a major OEM or someone that is involved in this whole supply chain, then yes, there's a specific focus in that sector. So they are a bit more entrenched into the subject and they understand what's going on and how to go about it. But those people also have different challenges. The brand new companies which come out trying to serve the EV economy and everybody else don't have cash flow, they don't have any sort of projections, they have all sorts of challenges, banks don't go to them easily. But of course, it comes down to the off-takers as well of their businesses. So that's another way we can look at it. And we're trying to get more into the SME slowly. Definitely, that's a space that we want to play because 99% of Singapore's economy is still SME to run. So there's the opportunity for us there in that space. But having said that, a lot of the workload is actually going to the top tier. Still, in terms from advisory, from supply chain to CapEx to everything else, the big spectrum of work that is going on in that space.
Fantastic insights. I think in terms of empowering the community, in terms of upskilling SMEs, I think really resonates with the insights that I've seen across ASEAN. Ralph, if I move on to you, in terms of, I guess, as we look forward to the future, what are some cutting-edge products, technologies, or solutions that you truly believe have the potential to revolutionize the renewable energy and mobility sectors, specifically in ASEAN?
Thanks, Michael. So Michael did prepare us for these first questions. So I do have some slides. I don't know if they're going to go up.
Could we have the slides up for Ralph, please?
So like a celebrity chef, here's something I prepared earlier. Really, it sort of links into what Ralph said was, about the issues, the 3Ds. What I want to explore very quickly is about the rigidity of the supply chains and how well entrenched those ecosystems and supply chains are. And that's going to both provide opportunity as well as challenges for transition, and also provide opportunities for what the future looks like in terms of the landscape of both fuels, all the way from your fuel down to your mobility on the ground, in the air, and on the sea. So the reason why I put the road transport image up there is because that was a really rapid transition in the 1900s, early 1900s. Within a matter of 10, 15 years, on the left hand, you've got one automobile surrounded by horse-drawn carts. 10, 15 years later, you've got one horse-drawn cart surrounded by automobiles. It's sort of similar to the EV transition we're seeing at the moment. Maybe not as rapid with EVs, but it's certainly one of the sort of leading indicators of how rapidly you can transform. Of course, shifting from hay or edible products and horse dung to automobiles in terms of the supply chain on fossil fuels. Obviously, there's a different story now. We're facing very entrenched. Same thing with shipping. From the first steamship, which came in about 1910, that was actually a Shell steamship from Rotterdam. That was preceded by sail cutters, basically, purely driven not by fossil fuel, but by the wind. And that transition happened really quickly as well. Again, it was because of fossil fuels, because of coal, because of that transition to those more convenient, higher energy, higher calorific value fuels to basically take you further more efficiently, as we thought at that time. Transitions can occur rapidly. But this is the problem. This is where we created the really entrenched and rigid infrastructure and supply chains that have now become an issue in terms of really sort of trying to map out a transition. Just over the last 2 days, we saw, I think, ExxonMobil, and then just last night, yet another acquisition of Hess by another oil and gas major. So we're not seeing a slowdown. We're seeing actually a consolidation in the fossil fuel industry. So that's a little bit worrying, because we should have, I think a session I attended this morning was, this should have happened 30 years ago, and we're still talking about transition. So petrochemicals, that's really the problem. Those supply chains, that very rigid structure, is very, very difficult to shake off. It's very, very difficult to change what happened in the 50s and what is now happening and how we're polluting the planet, but also the emissions related to those petrochemical supply chains.
I guess, Ralph, one question I have for you, having interacted with CEO recently and board, is the pace of acceleration. So the examples that you shared, very reflective of looking backwards, but I guess current state, I use an example where you have a mobility provider who started with laptop batteries and then cell phones, moved on to EV batteries for cars, then trucks, then trains, in the space of several months versus what you projected on the slides in terms of that. What is your view in terms of this pace of acceleration, and what are you seeing?
No, I think there's, that's a really good example. I think that was from Indonesia, was it? You mentioned.
It was one of the countries, yeah.
Yeah. So no, I mean, transition can. All I'm saying is really that we're stuck in the petrochemical supply chain. We are a little bit stuck in entrenched infrastructure. I think elsewhere we can see that transition happening a lot faster. But I'm just saying that's probably the sticking point.
So petrochemicals, to fix the errors of the past, will take significantly longer.
That's right. Yeah. And also, Lee Hsien Loong, last night, Singapore International Energy Week is going on at the moment as well. He said quite, clearly and logically, we cannot just dismantle these. There are whole, industries built around these petrochemical supply chains. They're very difficult to dismantle and replace. Whether you have the new technology there or not, whether it's scalable or not, there are existing, businesses and industries that really have a long life cycle. A horse lives till, 25, 30 years. A car you can use for up to about, 15, 20 years. Solar panels, 15, 25 years. But those petrochemical industries, I mean, they've been entrenched in the system in Singapore for many, many years. We're talking about since the 1970s. Very, very difficult to disrupt those. So this slide really just shows what are the biggest nuts we have to crack. Clearly energy, transportation, agricultural land use, etc. Those are taking up the biggest share of the emissions. So that's really where we have to focus. There's no point in focusing on, 2% of shipping, 2% for airlines. We've really got to focus on the big stuff. And that means we've got to start looking at the solutions that are going to replace those entrenched systems. But it doesn't matter if it takes another 10 years. We just have to start now. So these are my two sort of crystal ball ideas.
Predictions,
you know.
yeah.
I think that
Apologies, everyone, technical difficulty. So you were saying two crystal ball
so
predictions.
two crystal balls. The first one is the ammonia hydrogen. So the ammonia is basically the energy carrier. Hydrogen is obviously what you get from, you know, that's the splitting of the different substances. There are very good arguments. I do believe battery electric vehicles are a transition. I don't think battery electric vehicles are our final destination on transportation, either for heavy goods vehicle, passenger vehicles, maybe for last mile. Maybe that's where they'll come in. I think that's probably where we're going to settle. But if we're talking about air travel, if we're talking about shipping, we're going to be talking about ammonia, methanol, and hydrogen. If you just look at those estimates on vehicle weight, another 500 kilograms of a hydrogen fuel cell against a battery electric vehicle. That's the weight of a battery. So you can imagine most of the emissions we get now come from the combustion of fossil fuels. But there's a lot of airborne particulate matter which comes from the tires and the brakes. So imagine adding half a ton to your vehicle, a passenger vehicle. Half a ton, what that's going to do to the friction on the roads, the weight to the brakes and the tires. There's a lot of particulate matter, additional particulate matter, and just the wear and tear. Plus, Singapore HDB car parks are not built to handle, you know, all BEVs to go in there. They will collapse under the weight. So they have to be careful about how many people actually park BEVs there. So I think hydrogen for passenger vehicles is going to be the answer. For heavy goods vehicles, I think, you know, there is that sweet spot in the middle, 500 kilometers to 1,000 kilometers. I think that's where you're talking about fuel cell, a hydrogen fuel cell coming in. So, you know, horses for courses, it's really, there are different solutions for different types of mobility issues. And this is the one that might cause a little bit of consternation, but last night in the dinner I had a chat with one very nice chap, Tom from UK, who's out here with the British High Commission, and we talked about nuclear. He said, what is the feeling in Asia about nuclear power? I said, well, it's actually very cautious. It's a political hot potato. People are not necessarily in favor or against, but politically, there are no parties who really want to put it on the table and say, this is the pathway. But Singapore has, last night, clearly made a statement about nuclear fuel and nuclear small modular reactors. And we have to face the fact that maybe we've left it too late. Maybe this is one of the only solutions. So I know some of you will disagree, and there are challenges with nuclear. There's cost, there's uranium sourcing, there's disposal of spent fuel. There's a lot of issues with nuclear. The lead time into energy production. But it is one of the solutions which we may now have to revert to. And just a couple of last slides showing you why. Here's the deaths per terawatt hour in coal, oil, and you see solar and nuclear and hydropower down the bottom. Logical, but we don't think about these sometimes. We don't think about how dangerous. This does not include war. This does not include Chernobyl, 4 Mile Island, Fukushima, but this does include the regular power production from these fuels. So these are things to bear in mind. The last slide shows you very importantly in the transition, in the mobility transition and the energy transition, where these different fuels and what the carbon footprints are. You can see coal, oil and gas, all the others on the left-hand side, very high carbon footprints, and all the way down, you've got, on the right-hand side, you've got solar, hydropower, and nuclear. So I think that sort of gives you an idea why we might see this happen and why we're seeing governments now take this stance. Thank you.
Excellent, Rolf. So in terms of the crystal ball, it's good to give a future-looking prediction. But I guess also in my experience, we honestly don't know what the future holds in terms of the next 6 to 12 months, given the acceleration of all the areas, right? I see a lot of shaking heads. And specifically in my space, having dealt with various organizations, financial sector and automotive, there's constant innovation, there's constant thinking around. And Ralph, to your point around, yes, nuclear power is quite controversial and quite provocative, but actually exploring what ways that potentially it could be explored in a safe and risk-free environment. I'll turn my focus now to Dr. Ali. I think in terms of Bloomberg, in terms of the space you're in, you obviously see a multitude of different areas of data and research from multiple sources. Could you share a notable experience from the ASEAN region specifically, where renewable energy or sustainable mobility face significant challenges, and how those were really overcome, Marty? That would be really helpful.
Thank you very much for the question and the opportunity. So in the ASEAN region, on the renewable energy space, if we look across the region, initially the main opportunity was around hydro and geothermal being geographically limited to primarily Indonesia and Philippines. But at the end of the last decade, so just about 5 years ago, when Vietnam introduced its feed-in tariff program, overnight we saw a significant boom, first in solar and then onshore wind. In fact, in 2020, Vietnam became the third largest solar market globally. That's globally, so that's not even talking about just in APAC. And what that shows you is really the role of policy. Now, there are many challenges, as Ralph and Rolf already talked about before. When it comes to solar and wind technology, these are technologies that now have reached mature technology level, meaning that the performance of the technologies are very well known. There are many developers around the world that can deploy the technologies. And their uptake is primarily driven by non-technology issues. So the reason that Vietnam had such a large success and the rest of the region hasn't seen as much is primarily to do with how the power markets in the region operate. Now, the Vietnam's case also, after the feed-in tariff expired, then unfortunately there was a bit of a bust. And while still Vietnam is the largest renewable energy market in the region, certainly annual investments in renewables have gone down since the feed-in tariff expired. Now, the feed-in tariff that Vietnam had put in place was a little bit overly generous, so that's also not over the long-term sustainable from a financial perspective. If you look across the rest of the region, some policy measures, for example, Malaysia recently introduced its corporate green program, which has driven quite a significant uptake of rooftop solar. That has again been successful. If I step back and look from the perspective of power markets, in ASEAN, with the exception of Singapore and Philippines, the power markets in the region are not liberalized yet. Specifically when it comes to the electricity retail price, they're regulated, and in many markets, for example in Malaysia, they're intentionally underpriced. When you underprice any commodity, then it becomes very difficult to attract investment to support a transition. Now, there are very valid reasons for why governments have chosen to do that. Part of it has been around affordability for general consumers, but also for providing an advantage to domestic industry. But the problem with this is that if you underprice electricity, then if you go to, say, in Malaysia to TMB and say, hey, TMB, by the way, you have to transition. You have to phase out your thermal power plants and then invest in the grid and connect a lot of renewable assets that you don't own, then basically economically this becomes impossible. So the challenge that we face today with renewable uptake in the region is not so much that these technologies are not proven, that there is not enough funding. It's really about the power market structure. It doesn't mean that you overnight go in and completely rip out the current power market structure. You need to have a managed transition. You need to make sure that the existing investors and the existing utilities have a survivable route to be able to do that transition. But you need to really start that process. Now, again, Vietnam is a good example. They do have a power market reform plan underway. Malaysia, to be fair, has done some good measures over the last couple of years. But if you look at particularly Peninsula Malaysia, it's still a very challenging environment when it comes to renewable deployment. Maybe I'll stop there and pass it back to you. I can come back to the sustainability one later.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. I guess one question I get asked all the time, specifically in Malaysia, but also in certain countries like Thailand, etc., is around the new technology used to be quite expensive and not commercially viable, versus what we'd say the cost or commercials of dirty energy would be. So I guess, Dr. Ali, what you're synthesizing that whole, the points that you made is really around making sure that the way that the energy sector is set up makes it attractive in the longer term to actually bring in the new technologies. I mean, what are you seeing where, there are some poster children in terms of leading practice and where it's actually working well? That would be great to hear your views briefly.
Thank you. So first, the capital cost of the equipment, so solar modules or wind turbines, have significantly come down. So solar modules in particular, even though there was a bit of an inflation pressure last year, they've come down quite a bit. It used to be that back in 10 years ago, a solar module will cost more than $1 a watt. Now it's close to 20 cents. So you can see that, like, how much of a reduction that is. Wind turbines similarly have come down, although wind turbines recently with some of the larger models, particularly for Western manufacturers, there are some challenges as some of the raw input material costs have gone up. So the capital costs have come down quite significantly. Now, the challenge is one, first you have to make sure that you have a power market that does allow you to build renewables and connect to the grid in a very easy manner. And that's actually very challenging in the region. And then on top of that, you have to look at, if you have a power market design that was used to thermal power plants that are dispatchable, that provide base load, if you want to shift from that to a power market design that accommodates a lot of variable renewable generation, then you need to be willing to actually put in the market structures for that. That means having incentives for ancillary services, having different types of products for short-term to long-term balancing needs. These are things that, again, both they require some technology, but more importantly, require power market design. There are good examples around the world, and not all of them come from developed economies. Actually, around the world, for developing economies, there are some poster childs, such as Chile. Also in the region, Cambodia has had some good success with their renewable auction mechanism that the Asian Development Bank has hosted for them. So again, this is not just about, the technology is expensive and all the European countries can afford it. The technologies have come down, but there needs to be a willingness to actually redesign the power market to accommodate them.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Very, very powerful insights. If we shift now through to the automotive industry, we're very blessed to have Amanda join us in terms of sharing with us some insights. I guess, how does Volvo Trucks envision the role of commercial vehicles in truly contributing to sustainable and green transportation? I think Amanda's got some slides just to bring things to life as well. If we could flash those up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, knowing that the sessions is in after lunch, I guess it's good to prepare some slides as well for all of you. So slides ready? Mike has actually prepared us with the questions, so we are able to prepare some slides for you. But definitely you'll see my first slides. As speakers, we didn't align our slides. Guess what? Look, it's the same.
And as the moderator, I have to be very clear. There was no detailed brief given to any of the panelists in terms of the slides, so it's very, very good to see alignment across industries.
Right, thank you. I will say great mind things alike now. Right, what's Volvo doing? I'll probably share a little bit more of Volvo Group at the international level, and I'll probably also then move on to the local flavors as far as Malaysia is concerned, particularly on Volvo commercial vehicle, means the Volvo trucks, yeah? So as you can see in the slides here, the change is coming. How fast, how soon is always what we have in mind. And let's see what happened at Volvo here internally. I don't have to elaborate further on this slide already because Ralph has done me a
Ralph
good
covered
page.
it, yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Oops. So Volvo has this pledge, all right? We are towards zero accident and zero carbon emission in the transportation industry. So that's our Volvo pledge to the world. And in Europe and North America, currently we are holding more than 50% market share of electric trucks. And having presence in more than 40 other countries. And we currently have 6 electric trucks, per se. So addressing some of your questions, Mike. So what Volvo is doing as far as moving towards sustainable mobility. So by 2024, we aim to achieve this 100% of fossil-free of our vehicles. So we are migrating, like what Ralph said. There are different applications of different usage of commercial trucks. So currently we have got the battery electrics. We have also got the fuel cell electric. And we are still continue a lot of heavy work of R&D into still ICE, internal combustion engine, but not using diesel, using renewable energies, including hydrogen. So that's what Dr. Ali has also mentioned. So we are also moving into what are the potential new technologies that's coming on board. So I just bring everybody to a closer home context. Can you imagine, or do you know, how much of carbon emission that's released for a truck as compared to a car? You are start to count? All right.
I personally don't know, Amanda, so I'm very, very curious, yeah.
The tip is in the picture. All right, the slides. So literally, if you compare one prime mover, the amount of carbon emission that's released from a truck is equivalent to our 47 of B-segment sedan, a light Honda City or Toyota Vios, and 67 a light of carbon emission of Asia. All right? So that's the amount of carbon emission of one truck. So it's actually very, very important for commercial vehicle to also participate in as far as the emission is concerned, and also sustainable mobility.
Amanda, I've got one question on that in terms of, I think what Dr. Ali was responding to in terms of the commercial attractiveness, right?
Yes.
We can see from that slide specifically that it's the right thing to do in terms of the broader strategy of looking at neutrality, etc. How long did it take to do that transition from, I would assume Volvo had the traditional trucks which were working, which was probably a lot more of the sedans that you reflected there. But how long did the organization take to do that transition, and what were the key points that accelerated it?
Yeah, it depends on market, I would say. Obviously, in European countries, it's a bit faster because of the, I would say, the facility, it's ready. The readiness of the market is there as compared to other countries. But having said, in Malaysia, happy to say that we already have our first EV prime movers in Malaysia already, being the first in Malaysia and also in Southeast Asia. In the past 1 year, the number of EV has actually mushroomed, particularly in also UAE, Arabian countries, and also for Southeast Asia, we have got Malaysia's coming on board, Singapore by Q1 next year. We also have Australia and also South Korea, as far as Volvo EV trucks are concerned. The numbers are duplicating month on month. So the adoption is coming, the wave is coming, right? And that actually links me to the next slide of what are the things that we need to speed up.
You read my mind, because I didn't see the slides before, so yeah.
Yeah, I think for Malaysia per se, and probably also in more Southeast Asia countries, I'll just summarize in 4 contexts. I think we all know about the facility and the charging stations. But for trucks, right, sometimes we had this discussion with some of the authorities. So don't forget the design of the roof as well. When you have your charging facility, don't forget the truck is still coming. So design is one, power grid and power station is another one that we need to look at. How do we do that together? Incentive, I think the local government Malaysia has launched pretty good incentive lately, your road tax, your My Hijau or My Guitar per se, and it's also available for trucks where you can claim up to 70% of the tax capital allowance over 2 years, right? And policies, obviously our policies currently is still very ICE-based, right, for commercial vehicles. So there's a lot of changes and discussion that's forthcoming to address this. Of course, ecosystem, I'm talking about some of the tariff where Dr. Ali was mentioning. So TNB it's also having a challenge ahead. But one of the things that they are looking at and we are talking about is there a change in different tariff? We are sharing our best practice in European countries where rates at night is different from rates in the day. So for trucks, you run is 24/7. So that's one. As far as to your question, Mike, how fast we can do that, I think for local home here, we have to do it in a staggered manner. For example, the focus will be on port areas to begin with and public roads, the main public roads. So slowly, but I think surely we'll get there. Yeah. And that will actually lead to my last slides. I think all this, all the panelists here, we all share the same goal and aspirations. I believe the audience here also share the same thing. And it doesn't work with one party. It all starts with yourself first as a consumer. Are you willing to pay a little bit more? Yeah, for example, for your ice cream, for your milk, for transportations per se. So I'll just leave that question for now.
Excellent, Amanda. I guess one of the pressing questions that I really would like to understand a bit more from Volvo is that last box you had on the previous slide in terms of the ecosystems. How does Volvo Trucks approach that area of ecosystems and bringing together powerful collaborations and partnerships and alliances? Because we've seen that work successfully in Europe and the US and other regions. How are you seeing it here in Malaysia and specifically around ASEAN?
There are a few initiatives that are already carried out. For example, I think we invite a lot of local leaders and also ASEAN leaders to back home to Sweden to share the latest technology and best practices. We have a smart city there that we see how actually it can be developed into a full green city. So that's one initiative. As far as the product is concerned, we are not just talking about the trucks, the design of the trucks per se, and putting them on the road. We are also talking about the batteries, the second life usage of the battery to complete the circular economy. So, trucks, batteries, right, we're talking about putting them, what happens to the batteries after 8 years? So we have a storage that you can still use it to store your RE, for example. So that has been done in a lot of the European countries and it's proven success. So we're talking about the whole cycle.
That's wonderful, because I think that a lot of the conversations that I'm having personally are really focused on who should we partner with, what is the right prioritization, what is the leading practice globally that Malaysia, but also ASEAN can leverage on. On that point, I'd love to circle back, Raf, in terms of sort of looking at the bank and how is the bank collaborating with industry pioneers to facilitate not only knowledge sharing, but experience exchange in, across ASEAN and how that's driven across the region.
In terms of change, I think that's where the advisory piece comes in, right? I think a lot of the times when we work with our customers, it's in the industries where I think we're driving more of the momentum. Is to actually spend time with them and trying to understand what they're really trying to do and which are the main pieces of components that they're trying to address. And that will typically tend to drive the roadmap and what they're looking at and some of the challenges behind them. if there are 2 or 3 areas, if I continue the momentum with mobility again, I mean, 2, 3 areas. One is the battery production itself. That is one space. The other one is obviously the charge station, which takes more just time to develop and stuff. And the other one is actually the actual CapEx to build the infrastructure for battery plants, probably the first scenario. So in all these spaces that we look into this, we typically tend to advise the clients around working with different kind of partners that we bring into with them to see how they can tailor some sort of measure and show how that actual work in terms of decommission and all the things is actually going to work. Right? If we can show some material development, particularly with names that are already established, it's been a lot more straightforward. It's just more defining that. The other thing, in fact, that is being more and more understood by the customers. I think there are a lot of banks out there having these kind of conversations, and consultants like yourselves, I mean, who really spend a lot of time with the clients. I think that level of framework of trying to understand how to go about this, I think it's getting more and more acknowledged. Challenge for banks typically in all of this work in working with is not even that. The advisory piece is one that's out of the way. The advisory pieces tend to be a bit longer. It's about how much cheaper we can get. Okay, and
number one question.
Yeah,
right?
number one question. And I think in the beginning, you know, when I'll literally say this about 3-4 years ago when we wanted to get into this agenda of financing this thing, and we put a mandate that every other relationship manager and some portfolio of businesses need to go and start showing that some of this portfolio is turning green. And it was all with good intention. We speak to the clients and think where, you know, most of the effort that is required in certain industries where we want to go and work with them, and we work with them. And we didn't necessarily have all the buttons to push, so we couldn't really help them with a lot of the transition work, you know, in terms of who they can work with and how they can work with, how they're going to go about this, setting some use cases and samples. A few years ago, we struggled with a bit of that. So that's why the framework and taxonomies all helped in a big way. Now, but at that time to now, I'll tell you, even to now, to a large extent, if you go through all this initiative and effort and putting all these measures out there, will you give it to me cheaper? Will the finance be cheaper? It is still the question I get. But put it this way, we're getting that out of the way. It's not going to be cheaper. Okay, it's something you have to do for the environment, and therefore it is what it is that you need to be prepared for. And therefore, the cost of financing will be what it is in terms of what it needs to be. Yes, there will be some sort of measure to help with the process as they go along, and we can work with them to see how we can address that. But it's not an opportunity to bring costs down in terms of their financing requirements. Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. I guess one of the questions I always get asked from a lot of organizations is, you know, how does a bank sort of firstly assess and mitigate the risks with climate finance investments? And one of my personal stories is that it's becoming, I've heard from one of the startups, it's becoming harder and harder to get investment. Great to understand how DBS looks at assessing and mitigating some of those risks.
You see, at the end of the day, we look at a customer portfolio purely based on you know, how the ROE needs to be on a particular portfolio, on a client. At the end of the day, banks, that's how they operate, right? We need to make sure that whatever it is green and not green, whatever it is, it has to be. It has to fit within an ROE that makes sense for us to actually do business with the client. From a risk perspective, we just want to make sure that anything that we do green, there's no greenwashing element to it. So there's a measure of exactly how you're going to produce that information. And that's being properly attestation and see how that's going to actually help us with our assessment and drive with that. So the basic principles is still the same. We don't fundamentally change anything. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to flip around quickly. So Dr. Ali, I guess, could you share your insights into the role of data and research? You know, in my last couple of years, we've really been focused on prioritization of solutions in terms of, you know, sustainable and renewable energy, but also sustainable mobility. You know, what is given you're from Bloomberg, could you share some insights into the role that data and research play in understanding the current landscape? And I guess the million-dollar question is, you obviously get a lot of clients that ask you, what does the future hold? So similar to Ralph, where he was talking about the crystal ball. Yeah, great to hear your insights on that.
Thank you very much for those two questions. If I may link your first question to actually the previous question that you asked, Ralph, how does a financial institution go about looking at how they can mitigate their climate change risks and also contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation? So measuring where the emissions are coming from is extremely important. And for any organization, having an understanding of where your emissions are coming from and how you can sort of tackle them is very critical. Many in the room would be familiar with Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, sort of your direct and indirect emissions, the emissions that are essentially your own activities are contributing to, the emissions that your purchase of electricity or mobility is contributing to, and then finally Scope 3 being the emissions associated with your supply chains. Now, depending on the industry, tackling these emissions will be either very easy or very difficult. For financial institutions in particular, it can be quite difficult because it's about the financed emission portfolio. So essentially the loans, the debts, the equity that they've provided to their customers and how those customers are using those fundings. In terms of what research can help, it can help by identifying what those risks and what those opportunities are around the transition. There is an initial knee-jerk reaction which says that, okay, let's just not invest in anything that has emissions, and let's just divest from all of it, and let's just focus on all the green stuff. In an ideal world, that would be great, but if we do that, one of the immediate things is, for example, let's focus on the energy supply. If you just say today, we're not going to invest in any fossil fuel supply and just go 100% green, what you're going to cause is you're going to cause an energy crisis, which will be highly inflationary, which will actually, in fact, slow down the transition. So what research can help you is really identify these sort of challenges. Apologies, I went on a bit of a tangent. Now, in terms of answering the second part of your question, well, how do we see the world? Let me start with the good news. The good news is that we are very close to hitting peak emissions thanks to maturity of technologies that help us with decarbonization of power and road transport. So getting to peak emissions within this decade now looks very feasible. And after that peak, we also see those technologies helping us with reducing the emissions. The challenge, though, is that we're not at a pace that would enable us with keeping the Paris Agreement goal alive. You would all remember that the Paris Agreement goal is to keep the average global surface temperature rise to well below 2 degrees by the end of the century. We are already at 1.2, so there's 0.8 left. Now, to complete my answer, well, how do we make sure that we actually achieve that? Number one, we should accelerate deployment of the mature technologies that we already have. This will help us a lot with lowering emissions from power as well as road transport, particularly personal mobility. Then we have to continue investing in scaling up the technologies that we're going to need for hard-to-abate sector. So for example, for cement, for steel, for aviation. We also need governance structures for managing the transition. So the ASEAN taxonomy, for example, is a good first step, but we need to help all companies, particularly those in hard-to-abate sectors, to have these sort of transition plans. And then finally, as Mark Carney said at the opening of today, we have to be able to bring everyone along. And that requires, again, good financial support from developed economies for developing economies.
Excellent, Dr. Ali. That was fantastic. I'm just looking at our time, and we also have an immense number of questions which have come through. So thank you very much, everyone, for shooting those through. I guess the first question, thoughts on hydrogen. Is there really an economic case for it? I think, Ralph, maybe, or it would be good to understand your thoughts in terms of that.
Yeah, just very quickly, I know we're running out of time. 97% of hydrogen being produced at the moment is grey. The other 3% is white, blue, green, pink, or purple. I won't explain what they all mean, but they're non-grey. So grey is the dirtiest. So imagine 97% is priced at about $1.50 to $2 per kilogram. All the rest are priced at about $7. Basically, we've got to get down there. And I'm linking now hydrogen to nuclear. You have offshore floating nuclear plants. You produce hydrogen at a viable cost, and then you can bring the price down. Currently, it's not going to work. You're not going to produce it through wind, solar, etc. We need that power for other uses. So I think there is a case, but we really need to be creative about how we produce hydrogen.
Great response, Ralph. Thank you so much. This one's quite close to my heart, and it's somewhat controversial, to be honest. I think considering the urgency of climate change, shouldn't humanity prioritize the creation of a better world over capital gains? One thing I have seen, I think, in terms of the Asian insights is in terms of it's cheaper to continue using, or the argument is it's cheaper to continue using dirty energy, and therefore it doesn't make sense. I guess the gist of this question is, at the heart, it's about doing the greater good in terms of more the long term. Any insights from the panelists? I see Ralph is looking very focused here in terms of any insights in terms of that. So in terms of commercial, okay. Let me point to Dr. Ali.
The way I would answer this is we should remember that we are currently in majority of the world not pricing emissions. So the moment you price that externality, as the economists like to call it, then actually capital markets or a capitalist system can deliver the transition for you. I would also be very careful, while not getting to sort of political debates, if you look at what capitalism has done for the world in terms of generating innovation, generating value, bringing a large portion of the population out of poverty all across the world, it is sort of the best worst system that we have. And if you look at in markets that it particularly functions well, again, they're well-regulated markets. Capitalism doesn't mean that you don't have regulation. It doesn't mean that you basically let everything go for free. It does mean that you actually have to price everything accordingly. And if you put a price on carbon, then you will find out very quickly that actually it's cheaper to go for the alternative than continue emitting. On the cost of it, we should also remember that the cost of inaction is actually a lot higher. We are already seeing the adverse impact of climate change through various weather-related events, and those are just going to get much more frequent. And when you account for those costs, then you very quickly, again, realize that it's cheaper to actually transition.
So looking at a more longer-term strategy, I like it's going to cost more. It's going to cost more effectively in the longer term. Yeah? Amanda, any insights from you on that question?
Definitely align with Dr. Ali. I think all of us are just temporary in this world. And when it comes to cost, I think we can't benchmark with the effect of climate change right now. You can't have a value to that. So it all depends on us, on how we want to transit this moment for a better world that we want to live in for tomorrow, for our children and our children's children.
Excellent, Amanda. So I guess we're running out of time a little bit. If there's one key message that you'd like to deliver to the industry in terms of looking at renewable energy and sustainable mobility, what would that most important key message you'd like to anchor, Ralph?
I don't know. Take action, move fast. I think there's enough of these forums and enough of these sessions. Saying a lot of the same things. So it's about time to take some action and actually get on with it. Right?
Yeah. Ralph, from your perspective?
No, excellent point about the carbon price. And Singapore, I think, has done a great job of trying to price carbon up to 2030. And I think we've got to ready ourselves for the eventuality of a carbon border adjustment mechanism being a global scenario, and really to prepare for that. So, price carbon into everything you do, and make sure that you have it in your balance sheet and your P&L.
Great. Well, Dr. Ali.
We shouldn't wait for silver bullet technologies. We should prioritize accelerating deployment of what we have already.
Amanda?
Start small, do what you can if you are in a company. Look at your procurement tender, look at ESG, is that one of the requirements? If you are from F&I, is your current F&I products, green loans, is meeting the current expectations? Do you want to look for other options? Leasing, for example, is one option. Look at what we do and start small from home itself. It makes a difference when you start from yourself. Thank you.
Excellent. I guess from myself as well, it's aim high, commit first, and to Ralph's point, take action. You know, time is infinite. You know, you have certain, time is finite. You have certain advancements which are accelerating at pace. Harness the ability to leverage lessons learned more broadly and take action. I'd like to thank each and every one of the esteemed panelists, and thank you to everyone for the questions and also attending the session. And I'm glad everyone is still awake after lunch, so thank you.